When several neighbors report unusual disturbances near NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal's property, the cops arrive with a warrant. They quickly locate a secret tunnel beneath the house, but their faces darken when they see what's within. An unexpected event rocked Greenville, a normally tranquil community, one bright afternoon. The silence was broken by the piercing sound of police sirens ringing across the streets. Curious neighbors could hear the noise becoming louder from their homes. The police appeared to be on a mission, aiming directly toward the center of the area. The sirens sounded as two police officers approached a magnificent residence down the street. The neighbors soon recognized their destination, Shaquille O'Neal's opulent villa. Peering through curtains and blinds, they watched in startled silence as the police van came to a standstill in front of the basketball legend's home. Whispers permeated the air. Why were the police visiting Shaq's house? Some neighbors remained glued to their windows, while others ventured outside to catch a closer glimpse of the unfolding scene. 4 officers rushed out of their cars and dashed to the front door. One of them knocked loudly, his tone hard and serious. "Mr. O'Neal, please come out. We've got a search warrant." Moments later, Shaq came at the door, towering over the officers but remaining cool. He greeted them politely, his powerful voice rising above the whispers of the crowd. The neighbors paid close attention as Shaq and the officers exchanged words. They spotted him nodding before stepping aside to allow the cops in. It was a frightening sight, but for some residents, it was not entirely unexpected. For months, weird happenings had been taking place at Shaq's villa, making the close-knit neighborhood nervous. The neighbors had noticed peculiar patterns over the preceding 3 months. Every night, at exactly midnight, enormous trucks would come to Shaq's villa and remain until the early hours of the morning. The workmen, covered in gloves and masks, moved quickly as if they were racing against time. Nobody knew what they were carrying or why, but the secrecy was unsettling. After the bizarre overnight activities, even stranger things started happening during the day. At least once a week, smaller vans would drive up to Shaq's residence, each bringing enormous containers. The workers moved fast and meticulously, carrying the empty containers inside, and emerged moments later, visibly heavier. No one had any idea what was being moved into and out of the villa. At first, the neighbors were silent. Residents took pleasure in respecting each other's privacy and avoided interfering with one another's affairs. They remained silent as they observed Shaq's strange behaviors at his home. Everyone saw it, but no one dared to challenge it until things became worse. Mysterious light beams began to emanate from Shaq's villa late at night. What could that be? The neighbors wondered, exchanging murmurs and frightened looks. For almost 2 weeks, weird flashes flashed, lasting only a few moments before fading. Then, an odd fragrance began to spread over the area. The stink appeared to emanate near Shaq's property, but no one could conclusively swear it was from his home. The community was clearly uneasy at this point. The instances were becoming too numerous to ignore. The residents finally resolved to take action. They convened a conference and, after considerable deliberation, decided that a delegation of the town's most respected leaders would pay Shaq a visit to explain their concerns. One beautiful morning, the group arrived at Shaq's front door. Their nerves were palpable, but their commitment was unwavering. When the towering former basketball great opened the door, one of them moved forward and talked in a courteous but serious tone. "Good day, sir. We apologize for arriving unannounced, but this is an urgent subject." Shaq Ever, the polite host, invited them in and offered beverages, but they declined. They were not there to exchange pleasantries. "Mr. O'Neal," one of them, began cautiously, "we've noticed some strange occurrences at your residence. The other occupants are becoming anxious, so we wanted to check in and ask, is everything okay?" Their words hung in the air, filled with tension. The neighbors held their breath while waiting for his response, unsure what they would hear, but yearning for clarity. Shaq smiled quietly and said, "I understand your concerns, gentlemen, and I truly apologize for causing them, but I promise you that everything is okay. There is nothing to worry about." His tone was cool, but the tension in the air was evident. The visitors exchanged suspicious looks, plainly not persuaded. They hoped for a more solid explanation to alleviate the citizens' concerns. After a little silence, they nodded grudgingly. "Okay then, we'll leave," one of them remarked, rising to his feet. Shaq apologized again for the commotion and led them to the door. He watched them go away, their figures fading into the dusk light. He sighed heavily once they were out of sight. The last thing he wanted was to draw attention to his house. Yet, he'd failed. When the men returned to the concerned residence, they repeated Shaq's assurances. Some were happy with the explanation and anxious to proceed, while others remained skeptical. Miss Janice distinguished out for her strong tone and determined expression. "That's silly," she said, her furious expression increasing. "Something is obviously going on over there." A faint murmur echoed throughout the assembly, and many rolled their eyes or exchanged knowing glances. Miss Janice's talent for acting was widely known, and her determination to get into other people's business was almost legendary. She was a wealthy woman who lived 3 homes down from Shaq. She was convinced that he was hiding something evil. Whispers of her concerns had already spread across the neighborhood. Fraud, trafficking, smuggling. She didn't hold back, letting her imagination run wild while sowing seeds of distrust among the other occupants. Rumors spread swiftly, fueled by her incessant gossip. Miss Janice had been silently studying Shaq's house, looking for any signs that might substantiate her beliefs. Her skepticism was not new. It had been shaped by years of personal anguish. Miss Janice was divorced 3 times and had little faith in humans. She believed that everyone had an underlying motivation, either to steal from her or to deceive her. Her first marriage ended in betrayal. Her husband had cheated on her. And when challenged, he accused her of being unreasonable and overbearing. His love for her had diminished, so he departed to be with someone else. That unpleasant event sparked her lifelong distrust, and her unsuccessful marriages further fueled her skepticism. Her second marriage failed due to her own mistakes. She became unduly distrustful of her new husband, after being betrayed in her previous marriage. Every text or phone he received triggered her paranoia. She was convinced he was hiding something, so she was continually trying to figure out who was on the other end. Her husband, frustrated by her lack of trust, attempted to address her fears, but she would not listen. She became so consumed with her doubts that she falsely accused him of adultery and sued for divorce. It wasn't until after their breakup that she realized he'd been innocent all along. Miss Janice's third marriage lasted less than a year. This time, the betrayal was genuine. Her husband had lied about his fortune. When she discovered the truth, she didn't hesitate to kick him out, enraged that he had married her for her money. The incident made her disillusioned and unwilling to try marriage again. Her trust issues worsened, and her suspicions about others became nearly second nature, a feature that grew stronger after Shaq moved into the area. Miss Janice couldn't get over the fact that something about Shaq felt odd from the time he arrived. She made it her duty to discover the truth, keeping a careful eye on his home whenever she had the opportunity. She became obsessed with the trucks that came and departed, desperate to see what they were carrying. But her attempts were futile. The absence of tangible evidence always upset her, driving her determination. When the locals decided to face Shaq, she had hoped that they would finally get answers. But his ambiguous assurances left her dissatisfied, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. Determined, she intensified her observation, keeping a closer eye on the house. Weeks passed without any breakthroughs, and her patience began to wane. Then, one night, right when she was about to give up and go to bed, something happened. She heard loud sounds coming from Shaq's property. Intrigued, she dashed out, her heart beating. In the poor light, she could make out 2 persons gesticulating furiously, engaged in what appeared to be an intense argument. She tried to catch their words, but most of their talk was lost to the night. However, a clip made it to her ears. "That is not going to sit well with the boss. You received explicit instructions." Her aggravation mounted as the remainder of the conversation remained incomprehensible. Even so, it heightened her suspicions. They were plainly discussing something private, which appeared to implicate Shaq. That night, Ms. Janice stayed awake, trying to piece together what little she had heard and planning her next step. She was more determined than ever to find out what was actually going on at Shaq's house. By morning, Miss Janice had made her decision. She was determined to utilize the events of the previous night to find out the truth about Shaq. She spent the day preparing and decided to strike in the evening. The NBA legend followed a typical regimen. Every evening he went for a jog, going to the end of the block and back 7 times before stopping. That evening, Janice decided to accompany him. Shaq was taken aback when she suddenly came jogging beside him. Before he could respond, she blurted out, "I know you're hiding something. I'll find out what it is." Her voice was harsh and full of purpose. Shaq looked at her quietly, his expression unreadable. "Of course, you are correct," he responded evenly. His tone was excruciatingly nonchalant. Her displeasure was heightened by his lack of response. She tried to agitate him further, throwing stinging words and accusations at him in the hopes that he'd make a mistake or admit something. But Shaq remained unconcerned, either dismissing her jabs or issuing courteous reminders to be cautious while jogging. Janice eventually understood she wasn't going anywhere. Frustrated and out of breath, she gave up and headed back home, seething. As she sat down to collect her thoughts, an idea came to her. If Shaq refused to break, she'd find another method to expose his secrets. Determined, she grabbed her phone and made a few calls. When she was finished, she reclined back on her couch with a contented grin. Her plan was in motion, and she couldn't wait to see how it played out. She was confident that Shaq would soon be revealed for who he really was. When night fell, her plan came to fruition. The sound of police sirens filled the air, becoming louder as they approached Shaq's home. Janice peered through her window, her pulse racing with anticipation. As the police cars approached Shaq's driveway, she couldn't contain her enthusiasm. Janice stepped outside, eager to get closer to the excitement, and approached one of the officers. By this point, a few nosy neighbors had gathered to see what was going on. Whispers and murmurs filled the air as they pondered on what may be going on. When the officers knocked on Shaq's door, he opened it calmly as always. Janice, along with a couple of the more interested neighbors, followed the cops inside, desperate to find out what her renowned neighbor was hiding. Shaq led the group into his enormous home, his poise maintained in the face of the audience and police presence. The anticipation was palpable as they proceeded from room to room, each expecting to uncover some dark secret. Finally, Shaq came to a door and opened it, revealing a staircase going to the basement. All eyes were fixed on him as he signaled for them to follow. Everyone believed that what lay below would ultimately expose the truth. Everyone was shocked by Shaq's sudden stop in front of a massive, heavy door at the end of the basement. He hesitated for a moment, taking a big breath before opening it. The sight within surprised everyone. The well-lit underground tunnel revealed a big fish pond, stocked with a variety of fish swimming smoothly. Confusion and discomfort spread throughout the gathering. This was far from what everyone had anticipated. A police officer looked around, perplexed, while the neighbors exchanged weary glances. Shaq, sensing their confusion, started to explain. He explained that the fish pond was designed to provide food for local homeless shelters. He provided a county-issued license to grow and sell the fish, as well as all of the licenses he had received to create the pond and place the lights inside the tunnel. He told how the trucks arrived each night to collect the fish, which were then prepared and given to the refuge the next morning. The strange radiance radiating from Shaq's underground fish pond tube had prompted suspicions. The tunnel's shallow depth and partially translucent parts allowed light to escape. Furthermore, the high-intensity LED grow lights intended to mimic natural cycles and encourage healthy fish growth were quite bright. The story unfolded while Shaq spoke. After moving in, he discovered an unused tunnel beneath his home and decided to use it for something significant. He saw the problems of the homeless in the region, notably at the adjacent shelter, and wanted to help without calling attention to himself. This pond had become his means of making a difference. The mystery of the foul odor was also resolved. Shaq explained that pollution had already killed all of the fish, producing an unpleasant odor that persisted for days. He truly apologized for whatever inconvenience it had caused the neighborhood. Shaq chose to keep the project confidential because he wanted to focus on the cause rather than seek attention. He described seeing a homeless woman whose story really moved him. She had fled a violent marriage and wound up on the streets with no family or support system to fall back on. Shaq was driven to act quietly in response to her everyday struggle for survival. "Wow, sir, we apologize for interrupting. We sincerely regret it," the officer stated. Their voices were tinged with sadness. Shaq gave them a comforting smile. "It's okay," he answered kindly, leading them to the door. Ms. Janice stood silent, her mind racing as she searched for the proper words. Meanwhile, the other residents approached Shaq, their expressions filled with guilt. They apologized for doubting him and leaping to conclusions about his behavior. Shaq shook his head and waved them away softly. He smiled softly and added, "If I were in your shoes, I would have done the same thing. You were simply concerned about your safety, which is entirely understandable." The residents slowly dispersed, returning to their homes. Soon, only Shaq and Miss Janice were left standing in the peaceful darkness. Janice murmured, I don't know what to say. Shaq's smile widened. Come by tomorrow, he said. I want to show you something. Without waiting for an answer, he turned and walked back to his house, leaving Janice standing there in a state of uncertainty and curiosity. Her disbelief persisted as she returned home. Something had moved within her. That night, she laid up, responding to all that had transpired, her heart heavy with the awareness of how mistaken she had been about Shaq. By the morning, curiosity had taken control. She found herself standing on a doorstep, eager but hesitant. Shaq welcomed her warmly before leading her to his car. They drove in peaceful stillness until they reached a little homeless shelter. Janice's eyes widened in surprise as she took in the scene. A long queue of individuals, their faces carved with misery, patiently waited their turn to receive food from a little booth put up near the shelter. These people already have a lot to worry about, Shaq stated. The least I can do is ensure that they do not go hungry. Janice's chest tightened. She felt a deep shift within her as she watched Shaq's pure kindness. Her skepticism and her guarded attitude all seemed insignificant in the face of his generosity. She blinked back tears as they drove away, her perspective permanently altered. That day marked the start of a shift for Janice. She began volunteering at the shelter and discovered satisfaction in assisting others. Slowly she began to notice the world's beauty and the decency in people she had before neglected. Shaq's compassion triggered something special in Janice, and together they left a legacy of love and change, demonstrating that even tiny acts of giving can result in massive transformations. What a surprising revelation. What do you suppose Shaq was hiding in his home? What are your thoughts regarding his actions? Feel free to leave your ideas in the comments area. Thank you for watching. See you in the future video.